Hey there, my friend. This next video coming up is a little bit different than other videos. I'm just being me, So there is some grammatical errors. I say is instead of are a few times. There's also some theological errors. At first, I clean it up later, but like at one point, I say Jacob instead of Joseph when I mean Joseph. And there's a little bit of sometimes I'm looking out of the corner of my eye. That's not because I'm doubting what I'm saying. I'm looking, just rewatched this and thought, why do I do that? And you know why I do that? It's because this is an impromptu video, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm about to say next. It's from the heart. So I'm going like this because I'm going into myself to make sure that I'm thinking of what I know needs to be said instead of trying to seek out to find what you want me to say, because I kind of pretend like the camera is a person, because you are people in there, aren't you? And yeah, so when you see that happening, don't see that as me doubting myself, because there's no doubt here, like Gwen Stefani and all that. Instead, it's me making sure that I understand what's coming up next in the flow of the video. Here it is. Hello in there. How are you today? I hope you're doing great. I hope the Lord is blessing you, that you are finding fecundity and being prolific in your work for the Lord. Today we're going to be learning about the word Zakar. This might be backwards. Zion. That's the Zion right there. Hey, there you go. You know some Hebrew already. Zion, Kaf, Aish. Zakar. And this is supposed to be going from left to right. I don't know if it's backwards on the screen or not. Zakar, baby. Zakar does not mean to remember, although that's how it's defined. When you think of to remember, you think of something that had to be forgotten in order to remember it. You know what? What we're going to do right now is we're going to take all that pain and all that suffering that all of us have experienced and either bottled up or worked through in a healthy way. If you're one of those people who've worked through it in a healthy way, hallelujah. If you've bottled it up, I'm here to help you to get through some of that. Let's get through this together. Let's move all that being forgotten. Let's forget about that. Let's move it out of the way, and let's start with a clean slate in defining Zakar, because God does not forget his people. God loves his people. How many times have you forgotten somebody or something that you loved? You don't. You just don't do it. So don't worry. God has not forgotten you if you're his people. And he didn't forget Noah, but he did Zakar him. He did, let's not say remember. You know what? Here's this clean slate. Open up your mind. Open up your heart in a very deep way. Today, we're going to learn together. Storytelling is powerful, and there is a story behind it, the word Zakar. We're about to go through the thread. We're going to go on a little ride on the thread that is the word Zakar. We're going to use the law of firsts. The first time Zakar comes up, the second time, third time, fourth time, maybe the fifth time. I didn't count how many times. There's some times. And the fundamental definition of Zakar, it can be told in the unfolding of this story. So here we are. We're getting started. There's a story associated, wouldn't you know, with the word Zakar to be mindful of, to remember. At its root, Zakar is associated with the relationship between God and his people concerning his covenant with us. Zakar, foundationally, is defined concerning God and his relationship with his people, us and our relationship with him, founded on the covenant. or the covenants, however you want to look at it. All the covenants together are really one big covenant. The covenant is on display when God was mindful, Zakar, when he was mindful of Noah in the flood, right? That's the first time that we have this. Noah's on the ark. He's gone through the whole flood experience. He spent 100 years building the ark or so. He went through the flood with his family. Everything around him is dying. And then the flood is over, the water's abated, and God, Zakar, he remembered, he was mindful of Noah. Did he forget Noah? Obviously not. Noah was like the main dude that God was focused on, that his love was focused on. He killed everyone else. He did not forget Noah. The same picture is repeated, solidifying Zakar, the true essence of the word, when we see God being mindful of Abraham. The next time that Zakar comes up, it's talking about Abraham. He rescued Lot. When he's talking about, hey, I'm going to go rescue Lot, God, I'm going to go rescue Lot. When God says, I'm going to go rescue Lot, he wasn't being mindful of Lot. He was being mindful of Abraham. Take note here of the development of the word Zakar, the development of relationship and covenant here. He was being mindful of Abraham by rescuing Lot. He rescued in the midst of the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. So here we have Zakar being brought up in the flood, and then the Zakar being brought up in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, fully and completely destroying all the living on the world with breath in their lungs, fully and destroying an entire city that was much like, wouldn't you know it, much like the world, and that the intent of their heart was evil all the time. Zakar, what is he remembering here? Is he remembered the wicked? Huh? No, God is being judgmental, and God is dividing the righteous from the wicked. He's being choosy. He's choosing those who love him to Zakar, to be mindful of, to remember, while he is doing that judgmental thing as our Father does. The true essence of the word, we see God being mindful of Abraham. He rescued Lot in the midst of the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story begins to develop more as we see another relationship between God and one of his people blossom as a result of God remembering Abraham. Now, this time it doesn't say God remembered Abraham, but it can be inferenced that God is remembering Abraham because the covenant is that Abraham is going to be the father of many nations. He can't do that in his lifetime. There's no way. But part of his seed is Rachel, through marriage to her husband, who is one of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of the world? Nope, he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of the Pope? Nope, he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Abraham is the father of many nations, right? But if you want to get down to the source, you go to Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I'm one of them. Are you? So Abraham was fecund. And God remembered Abraham when he was mindful of Rachel. And what did he do for Rachel? Wouldn't you know? Abraham needs to be prolific, so his daughters need to be fecund. He opened Rachel's womb. The previous examples show an unfolding of the concept of Zakar concerning its positive effects when God's character, judgment, and mercy is expressed in relationship to his people through what? The medium that is his covenant with us. That's right. The medium that is his covenant with us. God says, this is my character that I will display to you through judgment and mercy because I love you. And these are the things that I expect you to do for me because I want to be loved. How do we know that he wants to be loved? The number one commandment, love God, right? He first loved us, we love him back. That's how it works. That's how all relationships work, my friends. So Zakar, it's unfolding in this relationship between his people and him through the medium that is the covenant, the greater ketubah, the husband and wife relationship that we have with our Father, with his Son. It's a two-way street. And the covenants as a whole make up that ketubah through the medium that is his covenant with us. Now, Zakar begins to be shown in its negative aspect, okay? So God's being mindful of remembering his people and treating them special, taking them out, and he's giving them special treatment. There's a lesson here. We should be giving one another special treatment. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be loving those who are of the world, who God points out to us, hey, this guy's going to be on the path. He doesn't know yet, but he's on the way. Come to me and work with me for this guy. Or these guys, they're not going to be on the path, but they're part of that furnace and you need to tend to the fire. So care for them to a certain degree. That is absolutely necessary. But don't spend your deepest love on them. Zakar, God's people, your brothers and sisters, your family, you are to treat them with an abundance of love. But there's a time when Zakar has negative aspects here. We're about to get into that now as we start moving towards Egypt. We see destruction and the special treatment Zakar being mindful of. We see destruction and the special treatment being mindful of Zakar. And now we see what happens when people are not listening to God. Abraham is an example of listening to God. Noah is an example of listening to God. The children of Abraham have an idea of who God is, but not a personal relationship with him. And they begin to get treated poorly by the world. And God's not so mindful of them for a time. The previous example show an unfolding of the concept of Zakar concerning its positive effects when God's character, judgment, and mercy is expressed in a relationship to his people through the medium that is his covenant with us. Now, Zakar begins to be shown in its negative aspect, or rather, what happens when a person fails to Zakar with God. He will be mindful of us. Are you mindful of him, my friend? Are you pulling your weight in the relationship that you have with God? Are you being mindful of God? Are you doing your number one commandment, the thing that you were built to do, the why of your existence? Are you doing it, huh? Or are you just doing it for yourself? Get over yourself. Put yourself on the altar and love God. Give up your life, or you will have no life. You'll be empty and completely filled with bondage and all the lies that come along with the world telling you you can't do those things. You're all wrapped up in these evil things. You have a responsibility to yourself and your family and your network to do these things. You don't have time to do what God says. You can sprinkle a little bit of him into this. Yeah, sprinkling a little bit of him into this is not loving God. That's loving yourself and being mindful of God's existence. Instead, you have to put your life down on the altar, and you have to choose to do what he wants you to do, wholly and completely. And when you don't do that, well, you find yourself in Egypt, making bricks and stomping around in the mud, not growing, not learning, not loving. That's what happens when we fail to Zakar with God. Jacob, so we remember Jacob, we got Abraham, got Isaac, and then we've got Jacob, right? We've got Jacob, who turns into Israel. Jacob asks the servant of Pharaoh to Zakar him so he can leave the dungeon. When I say the servant of Pharaoh, I mean he's in the dungeon because he was framed by the mistress of Potiphar, the horny mistress of Potiphar. She doesn't get what she wants from him, so she frames him, sends him to the dungeon, and then the cupbearer and the bread maker are sent into the dungeon. The bread maker and the cupbearer both come out of the dungeon. One of them dies, the other one is given a cup to continue his services to Pharaoh, and Jacob says, remember me, Zakar me, be mindful of me. Go to Pharaoh and tell him I exist. Get me out of this place, so he can leave the dungeon. The failure of this servant left Joseph in the dungeon. Joseph is a picture of Yeshua. Check out John Kostick's video on Yeshua and Joseph and the parallels they have with one another. Like right behind Moses, Joseph is just about as parallel as you could possibly get to Yeshua. He was put in the dungeon. He was sold into slavery for silver, just like Yeshua was sold into the slavery of the cross for silver by his own family. Yeshua's own family did this to him. The list goes on and on and on. Zakar. So when we start off in Egypt, every one of us is Egyptians to begin with. When we go into the dungeon and meet Yosef, or Yeshua, and he says, hey, get me out of here, love me, take a risk, and focus on helping me out here. And we fail to do it. Yeshua is left in the dungeon. He can't do anything for you if you don't help him out, okay? That's how it works. You have to do your part. The servant left Joseph in the dungeon. This next example is not so much a failure to Zakar, so that previous one was a complete and utter failure to Zakar, right? He did not Zakar Joseph. This next example is not so much a failure to Zakar, but a Zakar concerning evil, an evil Zakar. Not an evil Zakar on the part of you or me, but when we remember or are mindful of. See, oftentimes we see evil in front of us, but we kind of just ignore it because we're not equipped with how to handle it. Because Yeshua, we've left him in the dungeon. When we help Yeshua out, he helps us out, and we can be mindful of evil and learn how to properly handle it. Not in a barbaric way, but in a wise, systematic way. I've got a whole teaching on how to do that. But you got to watch the videos and subscribe and like the channel and support me, or you're not going to see these things, right? It's just like Yeshua. God's not going to get anywhere if you're not his hands and feet. I can't help you if you don't help me. It's just the way that things are. So, Zakar, concerning evil. Joseph, now out of the dungeon. So Joseph does eventually get out of the dungeon. He was made quite powerful, and his family needed the aid of his lofty position. Joseph's lofty position gave Joseph the power to better his family's station. So this is his dad. We got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So I said Isaac. Anyway, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob turns his name into Israel. He has 12 sons. One of those 12 sons is Joseph, the Technicolor Dreamcoat kid. Now Joseph, he becomes quite powerful in Egypt, and Jacob, his dad, is starving because the whole world is having a famine, right? And they come to Egypt, not knowing Joseph is still alive, for food. Joseph is the guy who's in charge of all the food in a worldwide famine. And he says, I want to better my family's station. But he doesn't just say, oh yeah, just because they're my family, I'm going to lay my life down to help them. No, this guy has got real responsibilities, and he's going to treat them the same way that he would treat anybody else. And he's mindful of the evil that they have a proclivity towards. So he tests them to see if he can help them without destroying himself and everything around him, because that's just their proclivity. They can't help themselves. It's like the frog that helps the scorpion across the pond, and then when he gets to the other side, the scorpion stabs him. He's like, why'd you do that? The scorpion says, well, sorry, it's in my nature. It's just what I do. Can't help it. Don't want to do it, but it's what happens. My friends, Joseph's family, their proclivity was to destroy Joseph. So Joseph had to test them because he was mindful. Zakar. He remembered the evil that they did to them. Does it mean he was unforgiving? No, he forgave them. But it doesn't mean that he forgot that they have a proclivity to poison him. He's not going to go drinking from the cup knowing that there could be poison in it. There's a difference between forgetting and forgiving. Zakar, his family's ways in treating such a lofty position in the past, right? So he's in the same lofty position that he was. So, you see that there's a parallel here. His father put him in the loftiest possible position within the family to look over the family affairs, to keep after his wicked brothers. They have this tendency to do wicked things, and his dad says, look, you need to learn how to handle this stuff, and you're the one that I can trust, so I'm trusting you with looking over your brothers. Then he goes to Egypt. Potiphar notices this skill and says, yeah, you're going to look over my household. He gets in trouble again, goes into the dungeon because he's doing things properly. That's why he's skilled at these things to begin with. People don't like this stubbornness in doing things properly. It holds their toes to the fire. So then, when he gets out of the dungeon, Pharaoh's like, hey, not only is this guy really skilled at keeping after things, but he speaks with God. In his mind, he's probably thinking of the gods. He speaks with God. I can trust him, so let's put him in charge of everything. In his father's house, he was in charge of everything. In Potiphar's house, he was in charge of everything. And in Pharaoh's country, the whole land of Egypt, he was in charge of everything. His family had a proclivity to destroying that kind of position. He needed to test them. This is an example of the being mindful of and rightly handling of an evil thing. Do you see how Zakar is being used in these different ways, starting off saying, this is how you can Zakar in a positive and beautiful way. These are the different developments within this Zakar, where God, Zakar, he remembers us. And he develops his relationship with us. And then our job to Zakar with him, this beautiful dance between us and our God. What a beautiful thing that we have with him. And now we're looking at the whole picture. The whole picture. We've got these negative aspects of Zakar. As the story of Zakar continues to develop around the covenant that our Elohim made with Abraham, you see that? We've got these things when people are doing what's supposed to be done in the covenant. These good things happen when people do not do what's supposed to be done. These bad things happen. This covenant with Abraham, we find a people, who in the process of time failed to Zakar. They failed to Zakar God and their covenant with him. We find a people in heavy bondage. How many of us are in heavy bondage? I bet you it lines right up with how many of us are forgetting the covenant. We're not mindful of the covenant. There's 1,001 excuses why we're not mindful of the covenant, and they all seem accurate. But any of us who have really, really sought it out with an open mind, we find that the covenant has never been broken. It was from the beginning, middle, and end. God's promises and his relationship with us are all wrapped up in that ketubah, our marriage covenant. We find a people in heavy bondage. No Joseph character to help now. Just this next time that Zakar comes up is chapters beyond. Joseph is dead. There's a new Pharaoh. And Pharaoh did not Zakar Joseph. He doesn't know about Joseph. No Joseph character to help. Probably because the Joseph character that was raised up to save them was stifled and put in a dishonorable place over and over again. And a few generations of these Joseph characters being stifled and put into a dishonorable place renders no Joseph character. He's in the dungeon. He doesn't get any help. He doesn't get any support. No help and no support. There's no help and no support. No Joseph character to help, and a Pharaoh who was not mindful of Joseph. This Pharaoh was enslaving them. In the midst of this sin and weakness, what do we find? A merciful God who exercises what? Yeah, he exercises Zakar. He becomes mindful of his sinful and weak people. He Zakars upon his people. He is mindful of his covenant. He encourages his people to Zakar what God did for them in breaking them free from bondage, right? So we're developing here. So he remembers his people. He breaks them free from bondage. And then we have the sixth, maybe seventh. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the seventh mention of Zakar. It'd be interesting to look into. But it's right around the seventh mention of Zakar. We have a God who's telling his people, look, I Zakared you, right? I remembered, I was mindful of you, and I broke you out of Egypt. Now I need you to remember. No, don't remember me quite yet. You're not really quite there yet. I want you to remember the covenant first, this medium by which you can get to know me. Yeshua said that those who know my commands and keep them, it is them who love me, and they will be loved of the Father, and I will show them who I am. How can you love him if you don't know who he is? How can you know who he is if you aren't keeping his commands? You can't. You're being deceived by the great deceiver who has and will deceive many, even the elect, if possible. One of the first things he does is he convinces us that we don't need to be mindful of the law, so that we never get to know God, so that we're loving Satan, the flesh, instead of God. God says, look, I remembered you. I brought you out of Egypt, and now you have a responsibility to me. And you can start in the footsteps, tiptoeing towards those responsibilities towards me, coming out of the world and remembering the Sabbath day. That's right. He is mindful of his covenant. He encourages people to Zakar what God did for them in breaking them free from bondage. Remember what I did for you. I broke you free from bondage, and gives his people one of the first and most powerful positive commands in the Word. Zakar the Sabbath day. How do we Zakar the Sabbath day? Boom, my friends. We keep it holy. We keep it holy. Keep the Sabbath day holy. The concept and blessing of Zakar can be seen in the Sabbath day. How can we see that? It's because we're stopping everything that we're doing on that day, my friends. Not just any day, that day. The day that has been from the beginning. Our God is more than powerful enough to keep things under control so that that day is the seventh day, is the seventh day, is the seventh day, 100 times over, 100,000 times over. Zakar, stop what you're doing. Prepare for it. Go into the Sabbath day, keeping it holy, having prepared for that day the same way that you would prepare for a vacation, the same way that you would prepare for an interview with a new job, the same way that you would prepare for meeting with the CEO top dog of your company, the same way that you would prepare for meeting with one of your employees if you're a CEO top dog of your company. The same way that you would prepare for anything, minus it being the same way. You're meeting with God. He's holding the fabric of reality together, all right? And you probably have absolutely no idea who he really is because the great deceiver is out there deceiving us. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I love to be the person who says what needs to be said to help you find the good news, the real good news, which is that you have responsibilities towards God. And one of those responsibilities is that you should Zakar. You should be mindful of that Sabbath day and go into it knowing God said, on this day, I promise I will meet with you. Week after week after week after week, we get to meet with our Father. And he speaks with us as a family, individually and as a community. and he grows us together. If you remember the Sabbath day, you're doing what God's doing. He remembers the Sabbath day. Be knit together. Both God and his people are remembering one another within the original and true terms of the agreement made for us between God and our patriarchs, our fathers, from the beginning. They put in the work to make that agreement with God. Don't just crumble it up and throw it out. Yeah. It's treasure. Are you overlooking treasure in your life? My friend, don't overlook the treasure. When's the last time that you stumbled upon some treasure, and then the use of that treasure was actually worth it? You're going to suffer. You're going to have some hurdles. You're going to stub your toe. You're going to bleed. You're going to cry. You're going to laugh. You're going to scream with joy on the way to that treasure. Don't throw it out, my friend. That treasure is worth it. You're going to spend your time doing things that are helplessly empty. They can't profit. They can't deliver. They're literally nothing. This solid world around us makes it seem like it is something, but it's not. It's nothing. My friend, don't fear what the world can do to you. Instead, be very courageous and have faith. God, he will Zakar you if you Zakar him. Be mindful, my friend. Be mindful. Amen. Thank you for growing with us today. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Don't be shy. I know that it's hard. It's hard to want to watch a video like this when there's so many videos out there with better sound and that are more entertaining, but they're empty. Those cat videos, they don't do too much for you, do they? This is solid, life-changing advice if you'll hear it. Don't argue with the priest now. I mean, if you're arguing with him, at least you're listening to him. Don't just stifle him and send him out and don't listen to him. Listen to the priest. And don't argue with him. Soften up that heart. Watch these videos. Be changed. Thank you for growing with us today.